The following program is a production of Pioneer Public Television. Major support for Compass is provided by the ongoing support of the Leo P. Flynn Estate of Millbank, South Dakota. Additional support is provided by the Southwest Minnesota Private Industry Council, promoting Southwest Minnesota as a place rich with opportunity. Come for the jobs, stay for the lifestyle. More information at swmnpic.org.
Hello and welcome to Compass, a production of Pioneer Public Television. I'm Les Heen, your host for Compass. It's a weekly discussion of public policy and important issues facing our viewing area. This week, we'll talk about how road improvements are affecting our region. We'll have folks from the Minnesota Department of Transportation, and they can help tell us what communities can do to have a say in road improvement projects, and also what goes into rural road construction. But first, Pioneer's Laura K. Prosser traveled to the towns of Clara City and Raymond, Minnesota, and she's got the story of how some improvements are there for one of the busiest roads in the region, Minnesota State Highway 23. Here's Laura's report.
Road construction can be a hot-button topic for some people. They see a detour sign and see red. But it's a necessary evil, as the towns of Clara City and Raymond recently discovered with the new Highway 23 bypass going in. I'm talking with Alan Setrum, a MnDOT representative, to get the full story of how detours and road construction can impact rural towns. We're here in Clara City in a construction trailer talking a little bit about Highway 23. Now, before we started, you told me that this was a unique project. Why is it such a unique project?
This is a corridor commerce project that was put forward by the legislators. There was a list of, I believe, 100 projects that were identified across the state. Highway 23 and then Highway 14, US Highway 14 were two of the major ones that were identified to increase freight traffic. Okay. And that's where this is kind of come in. Now,
specific to Highway 23 corridor, what is the purpose of these bypass lanes?
So they identified different areas, and these areas between Wilmer and Pipestone were identified to put in 10 different passing lanes. What we've done is we've taken off the old shoulder, and then we built the complete grade underneath to withstand 80 to 90,000 pound traffic.
So what kind of impact have these towns had with these detours and construction going on all summer?
This was a little more unique, because what we did back in November when we were finishing the design phases of it, we went and actually had public meetings in both Clara City and Raymond, met with the residents and the business owners, showed them a three layout that we could do. We could do a full detour, which would have taken traffic around both towns for the entire summer. Staged the construction, which was what we ended up going with. Or the third option was to put barricades up along the edge of the construction zone, and it would have cost about an additional $900,000 to do that. So we went, like I said, to each town, we took comments back. We spent about a week analyzing everything, and that's where we decided, working with the residents, that we would go with the stage construction. And then we finished the design and sent it out.
Why is open communication lines with towns and communities like this so important?
Well, a lot of times, unfortunately, because of the way things kind of work, we just go in and put the signs up and close the road down and don't give a lot of information beyond that. We've really made an effort in the last year to change that philosophy. I personally try and go out and meet with all the residents and business people that are right on the highways, give them my business card, and encourage them to even use my cell phone.
When you do that, what kind of responses, questions, concerns do you get from businesses of small towns worried about detours not, going past their towns for business?
Raymond, for example, the detours on County Road 7. So they can see the business ahead of them, but they have the barricades right in front of them. Unfortunately, we can't put full-blown business signs up for them, but we try to work with them as much as we can. And then, like I said, we take phone calls 24 hours a day if we have to get businesses, people to them and residents home and that kind of stuff. So.
With this particular project, did you see a lot of backlash from businesses, or did you hear about any struggling to stay open because of this construction?
No, and I think uniquely because we went out ahead of time and spent a lot of time trying to coordinate with everybody ahead of time, so they knew going into, like A. Paul's and Timpson Marine, and even the subway here in Clare City, we had conversations with them, through the project.
Well, that's wonderful, but what kind of funding issues or anything like that have you had?
Right now, this funding was a special funding, Corridor of Commerce money doesn't have any federal money on it. It's just all state funding through here. The governor felt like this was a necessary thing to get done, and we actually started the process about 1.5 years ago. And normally it takes 4 to 5 years to go from what we call cradle to grave on a design to build. We are going to resurface between Clare City and Willmar. We were kind of hoping maybe to get it done this fall, but we're not. So moving from Willmar to Pipestone, they shouldn't see another project until the spring, and that'll be done under traffic. So we won't affect traffic other than, a lane closure for 10 minutes at a time.
Well, wonderful. Thank you so much, Alan. And
That's it for us on Highway 23. I'm Pioneer's Laura K. Prosser. Back to Les in the studio.
And with us now to talk about how rural road projects are chosen and developed, we have from Otter Tail County, the county engineer, Rick West. Thanks for coming in, Rick.
Thank you.
And we also have the MnDOT district engineer, Jody Martinson. Jody, thanks for coming in. Thank you. And because we have viewers from a very wide viewing area, we'll just cover some sort of geography here first. Otter Tail County, west central Minnesota, and your region, Jody, it's from it's west central Minnesota and also a little bit of northwest, right?
Right. Yep. We go down to Cibboleth County and over to Otter Tail County in the city of Otter Tail, up to Mahnomen, and then the Minnesota-North Dakota border.
So towns like Appleton and Morris and Fergus Falls and Mahnomen and Detroit Lakes all in your area.
Yep,
okay.
Alexandria, Moorhead.
Yeah. So I know that this is the kind of topic that could take a lot of time to go over because rural road projects, and everybody thinks their road is the most important or needs the most changes. So how do you start with this enormous task of figuring out rural road projects? Jody, I'll start with you. How does MnDOT do that?
Sure. Well, we look at the funding that's available, the type of funding. We get some from state money, federal money, but really we're in a preservation mode. So a lot of our roads that we're fixing right now are preservation projects, and so we're looking at what kind of condition the road is in, how much life is left in that road. What is, how smooth is it? What's it like to drive over it? How much money are we putting into maintenance? And then, so we have quite a list of projects, and then you basically go through and prioritize and take the ones in the worst condition and start chipping away at it.
When we talk about planning, I know you'd mentioned before we started the show, we had a little bit of a time here to talk about planning ideas, and you'd said that there are ways for the public to get involved. I know there are meetings and those kinds of things. So tell us how that works or has worked in your county.
In Otter Tail County, when we developed the plan, we had 14 public open houses to educate, to do outreach to our citizens and to educate our citizens on where the money comes from for roads, how we do our planning, are we doing our planning in the proper manner. And through that whole process, it was well worth our time and effort. And it really helped us to explain the situation at hand with what we have for funding, and our budgets are limited as everyone's are, so you have to make sure that you're putting the money that you have in the right place and reference highways. So we were very satisfied with the outcome of that process, and the folks that chose to participate and come to those meetings, I think, learned how the system works and understood why we do what we do and how the prioritization happens with road projects.
So it sort of takes away some of the mystery of why this project versus that one and why this bridge versus that area.
Exactly. There's a reason for all of that, and there's the method of that selection process. Not everyone may agree with it, but there is a process.
And Jody, I know with MnDOT, when we were talking before the show started here, you mentioned the fact that some of these things, the planning is maybe much longer than people realize. You're talking about 5 or 6 years because a major highway project can involve so many different pieces, correct?
Absolutely. MnDOT looks at our projects and we have a 10-year plan, and so we're pretty close as to what projects are coming up the next 10 years, but like you mentioned, about year 6 is really when we want to meet with that community. If we're going through a city, we need to meet with them and find out what their needs are too, because they're just facing right now where a lot of their infrastructure is at the end of its life. And so if they need to replace their water and sewer, that's expensive for them, and it's a huge financial impact. So they need to be able to afford that they can do that at the same time our project goes through. And when we do that, it also provides us an opportunity to really do some thoughtful planning, and so we can meet with the cities beforehand and capture their needs. And there's a great program out there now with the Department of Health sponsors it, and it's a partnership for health. And so basically they have resources where they can send an advocate out to the community that can help capture those needs. And some of the needs are infrastructure, like I talked about, but some are also, what do they want their downtown to look like? So the aesthetic things, do they want park benches? Do they want some trees planted there? And looking at the width of their sidewalk and different things like that. And maybe they have some safety needs too that we need to address at that same time. And so it's kind of a complete streets concept. We look at, PEDs, we look at bikes, we look at the cars, we look at the freight movement going through there. And so we're able to capture that, and in meeting with them 6 years out gives us the time to do that and be able to afford to plan for it in our budget.
So it sounds like some of the Healthy Living Communities initiatives, for example, where you're putting together the idea of, well, how do we make this road project also help people with better biking routes or better walking routes or healthier communities or beautification? So all of those things can come into it at once?
Exactly.
Yeah. And I know Rick earlier mentioned that, for example, community Battle Lake is an example of a community in your area that went through this, right?
That's correct. Battle Lake, not so many years ago, went through that. And Battle Lake was actually, I think, the first community in Otter Tail County, and it was a MnDOT project. We had some intersecting county roads. But that was, I think, the first one that was kind of a complete streets concept where we're looking at safety, bikes, PEDs, freight, all of the above. And I thought it went very well. There was a lot of community involvement and a lot of discussion happened of what should the downtown look like. What amenities should be on Trunk Highway 78 through Battle Lake. And I've heard a lot of positive comments from the citizens after it's done. I mean, during construction, nothing's pretty, but and there's inconveniences. But I think after it was all wrapped up and the flowers in the flower pots the next spring, it looks very nice. It's well accepted, and the citizens are enjoying it.
So you have to start with some very big questions and a lot of plans and a lot of time, and then as time goes on, then sort of narrow it down and reshape it a little bit.
Yeah, and I think all of us are doing a better job in the planning arena than I've been in this business a long time, than we did 20 years ago. Absolutely. I mean, that's real, and I think that's a very good thing.
Yeah. It's worth the investment to spend that time up front to get it figured out. It is. It's just, you get such a better product at the end.
I know we talked a moment ago about the idea of how you sort of demystified some of the road projects by having the public meetings, and I think one of the other mysteries for a lot of people is how it all gets paid for. Because if someone's on a morning commute, they may drive on roads that are organized or supervised by 3, 4, or 5 different, from townships to counties to cities to interstate highway systems, whatever it may be. So, is there a way to help people understand where the funding comes from all of this?
Sure. It's not an easy question to answer. But
well, that's why I asked it cautiously, because there are a lot of challenges to figuring out the funding.
There is. I'll start, and then I think, Rick, you can probably go into some of the local options that you have that MnDOT doesn't quite have. But basically it starts out with there's federal money, and then there's some state money that's distributed into a trunk highway fund. But basically, when we start out with that state money, there's really 3 sources that it comes from. So gas tax, when you're at the pump, and there's a portion there, and then our motor vehicle sales tax is another portion, and then basically your tab fees. So those 3 sources from the state side of it get put into the highway user distribution fund, and that is split. Basically, MnDOT gets a portion of it, about 62%, roughly about 2/3 of it. Counties get a portion, and then the cities get a portion too. And so for MnDOT, we take our portion from that state and mix it with the federal money that we have, and then that's how our projects, for the most part, are programmed. There's some special funding that comes along, maybe a special bonding bill or something like that that'll supplement that, but that's essentially where MnDOT gets the majority of it. Now the locals have a few more options, and
we do. Jody mentioned the Highway Users Trust Fund, which is license fees and those funds, but we receive 29% of that as counties in Minnesota. Our other funding is federal. on the federal side, example, Otter Tail County, we may receive federal highway dollars about every third year for a project. So it's not every year. Recently, the state legislature allowed us the ability locally to institute a wheelage tax and a local option sales tax, which Otter Tail County has done.
Some counties have chosen to, some counties have not, right?
That is correct. It's optional. You know, the county board has to make the decision to do that, and our county board did. And what that relates in funding for Otter Tail, our county state aid construction funds is about 6.7 million or 6.8 annually million. Those two new sources, wheelage tax and local option sales tax, generate approximately 4 million. So for us, that's a nice amount of money that we can invest in our highway system that we didn't have before. It's generated locally, and you know, that was part of our 14 open houses that we talked about, the ability to generate these funds. And I think one statement I would like to make is that at one of our open houses towards the end of the process, one of the, actually a retired farmer that I know a little bit, stood up and said, you know, our grandparents and our parents built this system, maybe we need to step up and maintain it. Yeah. And that will always stick with me. I mean, sure. So we have those monies now, and it will help us. But in the long look at things, we're still about $7 million short annually to maintain and preserve the system. So
if let's just say if that money were there and you were able to, you know, get to that maintenance thing, what would be the improvements if you were to go beyond maintenance and look at improvements? And people say, well, what are the sort of things that people want to see in improvements in roads? Jody?
Well, I think you'd look at the type of fixes right now. We're doing what we can with the funds that we have, so I think you would probably see some longer term fixes. Instead of just milling off or removing the top 2 or 3 inches of pavement, you may go in and reclaim and actually dig down into the gravel and do a whole new surfacing. You probably see some reconstructions. You might see some shoulder widening, where some of our shoulders are very narrow. You could see some shoulder widening. You could do more, probably some concrete projects on Interstate 94. So I think longer term fixes would be key.
Okay. And I think for Otter Tail County, we would look at, we have a lot of our system is 11-foot lanes and a 2-foot gravel shoulder, very narrow, a lot of curves and hills in Otter Tail County. And some of these projects, we would rebuild that roadway, reconstruct it with wider shoulders for safety. And one of our big issues is load carrying capacity in the spring of the year when load restrictions are on. But where we're at, I mean, a lot of our work today, the bulk of it is going to be preservation of what's there today on the ground. So we would move to doing some more major improvement type projects versus what we're doing today.
Great. Well, I wish we had more time, but we're out of time right now. So Jody, Rick, thank you for joining us in Compass.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Thanks.
That's it for this week on the topic of road construction. Compass producer Laura K. Prosser will take it from here and end this week's episode with the next installment of the Compass Literature Corner. Thanks for watching.
As part of the new segment to the show called the Compass Literature Corner, we will be talking to local authors and writers who have had an impact on this region or whom this region has had an impact on. Today we have a woman who traded in the big city life for a life on the farm in Pelican Rapids, Minnesota. Her books all seem to have a common theme. Besides that of rural life, hers is a theme of wool and sheep. And this sheep has a yarn to tell to young and old. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm proud to say that today's guest is both a children's author and a novelist. Welcome, Joan Jarvis Ellison.
Thank you.
So, Joan, why don't you tell us a little bit about what inspired you to go from fiction to kids' books to back again? Tell us a little bit about what inspired How to Paint a Sheep.
So the first inspiration was that my kids started having children, and so I had grandsons, and I had played with writing kids' stories since I was a little kid and really didn't do very well at it. But I wanted to write books for my grandsons. So when this grandson's parents got married, his dad suggested that they could have a parade in our field for their wedding. And what he really wanted to have was a parade with lambs that had been painted different colors. And I said, there is no way you're going to let lambs loose in the field. We'll never catch them again. But it was a cool idea. So instead of doing that the day of the wedding, we put the lambs in the barn and we filled spray bottles with Kool-Aid and took turns spraying sheep. Fun. So it actually works. And now we do it almost every year. We have a party and we paint sheep.
That's a good tradition to start.
Yeah, it's a good tradition, yeah.
And our audience members can start it if they pick up the book, How to Paint a Sheep, because it lists step-by-step instructions of how to paint them, which are easy to follow for kids and adults. Now,
all you need is a sheep.
Well, yeah, that's the important part, and maybe some paint or dye. Kool-Aid, exactly. So why don't you tell us a little bit about why children's books? Why make the switch?
Children's books are short. You only have to have a creative idea that goes for maybe 30 pages at most. If you write an adult novel, it's got to be hundreds of pages, and you have to be able to carry that idea all the way through, and it's a lot more work. A children's book I can work on in my head while I'm doing other things. I can find a friend who's willing to illustrate it or take photographs myself. The adult fiction is a much more complicated problem. The children's books I can write 2 a year. I write one for each of my grandsons' birthdays, and so 2 a year I get done. The adult books take me 10 years. It's a way different process. Yeah.
Now, your most recent book, Tangled Web, a novel, is kind of a little bit of a mystery novel wrapped up with a midlife crisis. So tell us a little bit about what inspired you to go back to novels after you did your children's.
I wanted to try a mystery story, and I thought, they always say, write what you know about, and I've been raising sheep for 30 years now, so I know sheep. You know, I told my dad once, I've learned everything there is about raising sheep, and he just laughed at me. He wasn't a farmer, but he knew that I wasn't speaking the truth. I was being naive, yes, actually naive. And so I have a lot of sheep stories in my head, and these are my sheep stories, but the characters aren't me. The characters aren't people that I know. And I got into the book, and I all of a sudden realized that I had no idea how I was going to deal emotionally with somebody going to jail or being on trial, so that it took me a lot longer to write the book than I expected to, and it changed the shape of the story. Once I made that realization, it really changed the story. It's a story about a young woman, a middle-aged woman with a midlife crisis who's really passionate about sheep and about fiber work. She's a knitter and a dyer and a spinner.
So then why sheep? Why wool? Why fiber for all your books?
Because that's what I do. You know, we have a farm. We have a small farm. We raise hay for our sheep. We shear them in the winter. We put coats on them before we shear them so their wool is clean. And I've learned through the years how to dye the wool, how to clean the wool, how to spin it into yarn, and how to sell it. And so all those things are part of the stories.
So with all that knowledge rolling around in your head, how do you decide which ones are best suited for children's books and which ones are best suited for novels?
Good question. For example, in Tangled Web, there's a story about the dogs getting into the field, or the sheep getting out of their pasture and being attacked by dogs. And I wouldn't put that in a kid's book, certainly not in a kid's picture book, but I don't think I'd even put it in, like a middle school book, because it's just too sad of a story. But it's a real story, and it's really part of farming. It's one of the things that sheep farmers worry about a lot. So it fit in with the Tangled Web story. It was an important part of the Tangled Web story to show how different people respond to that kind of a crisis in their farm.
Now, do you think with all these sheep themes and everything else that maybe you are limiting your audience base, or do you think anybody can relate to this type of wool and fiber and just a passion?
I'm not sure of the answer to that. I think that if you can catch their attention, that the Tangled Web story is a story about a woman who's trying to change the way she feels about her life and runs into people that she hasn't experienced before, personalities that she hasn't experienced before. It's about a woman learning The book clubs that I've talked to about it seem to feel that way, that it's a story about a woman's growth and anybody can relate to that story. And if they learn a little bit about sheep at the same time, that's okay. Yeah.
Well, and as it's a story about growth, you sit there and you use themes such as wool and tapestry and her growth in her own passion to show her growth as a person. So what kind of other materials or themes did you use to show the transition from the beginning of the book to the end?
Okay, so she learned more about her own creative abilities. She learned that she could do art. Fiber and art don't get crossed very often, but she learned that she could make new things, that she could expand herself. She learned to stand up for herself, which was something that she didn't do before that. And she learned to do it through meeting other fiber people and her interactions with other fiber people. And then I really love the books that Dick Francis wrote. They were mystery books. He was a jockey in England, and he wrote a whole long series of books about different jockeys or different people involved in horse racing. And every single book of his, you learned something about some little part of raising horses or racing horses or financing horses, and you learned about it in depth, and I just thought that was beautiful. So I tried to do that in Tangled Web. You know, you learn more about how to dye wool. You learn more about how to create a pattern, how to make a picture with yarn.
Well, and you went in depth to describe the dyeing process, to describe, you know, how you temper wool, how you get it ready, and you basically throughout the book described certain aspects of raising sheep and what it means and everything else.
And I also think that people really enjoy stories about animals. It's something that they're interested in. So
thank you so much, Joan. Now, where can our audience find your books?
Not very many places. They can find them at the Otter Tail County Historical Society Museum, and in Pelican Rapids, the shops in Pelican sell them. And then I have a blog. It's at www.sheepnotes.blogspot.com, and I sell them on my blog in my store.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for joining us, Joan.
Thank you very much. I've enjoyed it.
Wonderful. That's it for us in the Literature Corner. Please tune in next week for more people, places, and issues facing our viewing area. I'm Pioneer's Laura K. Prosser, and may your compass always point you in the direction of a good book.
Major support for Compass is provided by the ongoing support of the Leo P. Flynn Estate of Millbank, South Dakota. Additional support is provided by the Southwest Minnesota Private Industry Council, promoting Southwest Minnesota as a place rich with opportunity. Come for the jobs, stay for the lifestyle. More information at swmnpic.org.